Today on Budget Rescue, we're diving into a real family's budget to see what's keeping them stuck in debt and how they can change it. The Martin family is a family of four who feel like they're doing everything right, but somehow they're still buried in debt and struggling to get ahead. Right now, their finances are stretched so thin that one unexpected expense or job loss could send everything crashing down. Today, we're going to break down the numbers, figure out what's really going wrong in their budget, and build a realistic plan to help them get out of debt and to finally create some financial stability. Let's get started by getting to know the Martin family and their financial goals that they're hoping to achieve. Jack and Sarah live in suburban Columbus, Ohio. Jack is 36. He's a project manager at a regional construction company. Sarah is 34. She works as an elementary school teacher at a public school. Jack and Sarah have two kids. Luke is 8. He's in 3rd grade and he plays soccer. Emma is 5. She's in kindergarten and just started dance for the first time. Jack and Sarah bought their home in 2021 and were lucky enough to score a pretty decent interest rate. Both parents grew up in middle-class families, and they were the first in their families to attend college, which is partly why they carry student loan debt. They consider themselves financially responsible, but feel constantly stretched. Between childcare, kids' activities, groceries, and debt payments, they feel like they should be saving more, but honestly can't figure out where their money is going each month. In their Budget Rescue application, Jack and Sarah highlighted a couple different areas that they consider to be their financial stress points. Number 1, Jack and Sarah want to reduce stress around money and build stability for their kids. Jack and Sarah argue about whether they want to pay off debt or save. Jack thinks he should get a second job. Sarah doesn't think that they can handle Jack being away in the evenings. They both agree that they have too much debt all at once. They carry student loans, a car loan, a credit card, and a mortgage. Sarah stressed the pressure of the ever-growing grocery bill. The fact that the food prices continue to creep up has caused a huge strain on their budget. Jack mentioned that their minimal emergency fund has caused a great deal of concern for him. And then they both agreed that lifestyle inflation after buying their home has been a problem, particularly the cost to maintain and update their home. I asked Jack and Sarah to talk about their different family goals when it comes to their finances. I asked them to list out a few short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. First, let's talk about their short-term goals. These are the goals that they wish to accomplish in the next 1 to 2 years. They both agreed that their top 3 goals for short-term are pay off their $6,200 credit card debt, stop relying on credit cards, and stop feeling like we're living paycheck to paycheck despite having relatively good incomes. For their medium-term goals, that is goals that they would like to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years. They wrote, pay off our car loan, reduce our student loans to under $30,000, and increase retirement contributions to 15%. When it comes to the long-term goals, Jack and Sarah wrote, in the next 10 plus years, we'd like to help pay part of our kids' college, pay off our mortgage early, have enough savings for family vacations without going into debt, and retire early. We're thinking between age 60 and 62. All right, let's jump into the numbers. First, let's go over Jack and Sarah's income so we know what we're working with each month. Jack makes $82,000 per year. He grosses $6,833 per month. Sarah makes $56,000 a year, grossing $4,667. Together, after taxes, insurance, and retirement contributions, they have a net take-home pay of $8,100. As you can see in the spreadsheet here, I have the income inserted right at the top, and I always put in the net income because that is what hits your bank account each month. As you can see here, it says left to spend up at the top here. Total expenses, this number will increase as they spend money throughout the month. And then available to budget, this is going to be the number that we're going to be paying attention to today. Whatever this amount is here is the number that we're going to have that we can play with when it comes to contributing to various goals. So the higher the number this is, for example, the bigger snowball we'll have to either throw at debt or a greater number in terms of like savings that we can allocate to these different budget categories. The first category I like to look at when it comes to reviewing a budget is the bills category. This is typically expenses that come every month, and they're a lot of the times sort of like basic necessities. Things like mortgage and rent. In this case, Jack and Sarah have a mortgage. The total balance on their mortgage is $358,000. They have an interest rate of 4.1%, and their monthly payment, which includes principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, is $2,240. They pay $180 for electric and gas each month. Water is $90. For their phones, they pay $145. For internet, they pay $80. And that, let's see, yeah, so internet is $80, and then garbage is $45 a month. All right, next, let's look at the expenses category. These are the categories that are variable in nature. They can change each month, and really I think the key here is that Jack and Sarah have a lot of control over how much they spend in these categories. So first we have our groceries. That is $850 a month. Dining and takeout, they spend $320. Fuel, this is basically just gas that they put in their vehicle, $260 per month. Shopping, this is essentially like a miscellaneous category. They spend $100 a month. For car insurance, they spend $170. For car maintenance, they spend $80. Kids' activities and expenses is $265. Gifts is $50. For lifestyle, they say they spend $400 a month, and then they added a note saying that this includes gym, health expenses, and out-of-pocket medical. For streaming subscriptions, it looks like they bundled whatever streaming that they have, and that's $55 per month. For home maintenance, they spend $285. For clothing, they spend $50. For pets, it looks like they don't have any pets. No life insurance expenses. Entertainment, they have $400. And then travel, they have $0. Taking a look at the debt category, so both Jack and Sarah have student loans. For Jack's student loans, he has a minimum monthly payment of $420. His balance right now is sitting at $38,000, and he has a 6% interest rate on that. Sarah has a minimum payment each month of $280 with $26,000 outstanding and 5.5% interest. So combined, they have a $700 monthly payment for just their two student loans. They have a car loan. They have a 2022 Toyota Highlander. They have a balance of $27,500 with an interest rate of 5.2%. And their minimum monthly payment is $510. And they have one credit card. The total balance is $6,200. Their minimum payment each month is $150. And they're paying a whopping interest rate of 27.9%. I did ask Sarah and Jack what their credit card debt is from for the most part. And they said the major expenses were medical bills from when Emma was born, home repairs, and then some vacation spending. Taking a look at their savings, they do have two accounts that they contribute to monthly. First, they have an emergency fund. They have a total of $1,200 in their emergency fund. They contribute approximately $100 a month, although they said that it's not always $100. It's a somewhat inconsistent number. It really just depends what they have left over each month. They also have two 529 college funds set up for Lucas and Emma. Lucas has $2,500 and Emma has $1,900 in her account. They also have some retirement accounts set up as well that I don't have pictured here. So Jack said he has a 401k that he has $58,000 saved in, and Sarah has a pension estimate and then a 403b, the value of which equals $34,000. Based off the current allocation of the monthly income, we have a total of $325 left over each month. So this is the extra that they have that has not been allocated to one of the different budgeted line items here. I asked typically what happens to this $325 each month, and Jack had said that usually this $325 doesn't really go anywhere. It kind of just vanishes into thin air. He said it gets eaten up by unexpected school costs. He talked about Amazon purchases being an issue, birthday parties, home repairs, really a lot of just unexpected costs that they really just didn't anticipate, and this money is gone each month. Before jumping into next steps, let's talk a little bit about some of the high-level issues that I'm seeing after going through their numbers. The most glaringly obvious concern that I have is their lack of emergency fund. Looking at their bills and expenses, they need approximately $4,000 just to get by for the bills and expenses category. This isn't even talking about their debt payments. And so typically you need 3 to 6 months in an emergency fund to consider it fully funded. Right now they have $1,200. So they don't even have a single month covered here. So that is a major concern that I have. Another concern is their margin at the end of the month. As of now, they have $325 left over to allocate to their financial goals. They've got a substantial amount of debt, and they have a lot of savings goals that they have on their list. And right now, they don't have a lot of money to work with. And so they really need to try to work to increase this number, whether it's increasing their income or decreasing their expenses, in order to improve this number here, increase it so we have more money to work with each month. And that includes knowing where this $325 is going. Hearing that it's going to these phantom Amazon purchases and unexpected school expenses is not going to help us achieve these financial goals. So working actively to increase this number is going to make a huge difference when it comes to achieving our goals. Honestly, I think this family is overspending considering their income, their debt situation, and their lack of spending. And so in a moment here, we'll walk through their budget and I'll highlight some areas I think that they can cut. One example would be, the dining out area. As I mentioned previously, the goal is to increase this number. And so I think there are going to be some areas that we are going to need to cut or otherwise reprioritize in order to start achieving some of our goals as quickly as possible. Another issue is their lack of life insurance. I don't know if they just missed this line item or if they truly don't have life insurance in place, but this is a huge issue as two parents with little kids, two working parents. Even stay-at-home parents need to have life insurance because there is financial value to a stay-at-home parent. This is a huge issue and something that I'm absolutely going to be including in my next steps. They also do not have any sinking funds in place, and I think this is something that could really help them not be reliant on their credit cards, first of all, but also save up for these upcoming expenses to decrease some of that stress surrounding money. One of the comments that they had made is that they constantly feel behind, and a sinking fund is a great way to save ahead of time so that you already have the money set aside for known expenses that are coming up. One thing that I think of would be things like, of course, vacation. They mentioned relying on a credit card to fund their vacation, and they're still paying that off. Emma's birth expense. These are things that they put on their credit card that they knew was coming. Even if they weren't planning the pregnancy, they had 10 months to plan. And so I think it's one of those areas where if you can get sinking funds in place, it's a great opportunity to remove your reliance on credit cards. Because as you can tell here, they only have one credit card, but they're paying almost 28% interest. That's going to kill your financial plan if you're paying that kind of interest. It's high risk and it destroys your margin and your ability to contribute to your other goals. Another issue that I'm seeing here is really just in general their high level of debt compared to their income. Right now, they have a minimum per month debt payment of $1,360 combined. That's almost 17% of the Martin family's net take home. And that doesn't even include their mortgage. And so that's definitely a concern that I'm going to work with them on trying to resolve. One thing also to highlight when it comes to their debt is the fact that both Jack and Sarah have student loans. One unique thing about student loans is they are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. And so what that means is if Jack and Sarah hit hard times, they could be in a position where they might not be able to make their student loan payments. They're not able to file bankruptcy and get those loans forgiven. And that means that, especially if they're federal, they could have their wages garnished. It's just a really bad situation to be in. So while these might not be high interest, I still view them as risky in that you're not able to get out of the loans through other means like you can, perhaps like a car loan or a credit card. And so definitely tackling this debt, and given sort of the unique nature of student loans, it's something that's certainly a priority. And then lastly, one other thing that I noticed reviewing the numbers here is Jack and Sarah are behind in retirement. By the time you're in your 30s, you want to have approximately 3 times your salary in retirement, and they're not anywhere near that. And so focusing on retirement and maybe shifting some of their focuses around will help them get caught up. Before jumping into the rescue plan, I think we need to beef up that margin so we have more money to work with. The best way to do that right now, because we can't snap our fingers and get higher paying jobs for Jack and Sarah, is to work on cutting back some of our costs and reducing some of that overspending. So let's take a look at their budget and see if there's certain areas that we can cut. With the mortgage, electric, water, these areas are really hard to cut. I'm going to leave these alone. I don't think their mortgage is in a position where, they could get a lower interest rate or anything like that. If they had a interest rate of, let's say, 8% or something, I would suggest maybe looking into a refinance. That's not the case here. They have a very reasonable interest rate given the current market, and so I think we're pretty much stuck with these expenses. I think they could look into a cheaper phone plan. If they were interested in looking into Mint Mobile or some of these other maybe not quite as large phone carriers, they could absolutely reduce this. I'm going to lower this amount to, let's say, $80. I think they could absolutely get a cheaper phone plan for both of them that's reasonable without a whole lot of extra work. Moving to expenses, $850 is actually pretty reasonable. I commend Sarah. It's clear that she's working really hard. Grocery prices are absolutely insane. I'm a family of 5, and I'm actively fighting to keep our groceries at a reasonable rate, and I feel like every month it's more and more of a challenge. So nice work, Sarah, keeping that down. I'm not going to touch this because I think she's already stressed out about groceries as it is. However, I am going to slash your dining out and takeout budget. The reason for that is I think there are ways to still do takeout without maybe going to like a sit down. One example that I give often is, I don't know if you have Costco memberships, but if you do, like Costco pizza is $10, and that would absolutely feed your family for $10. Maybe there are other ways you could do takeout that's maybe not quite as expensive. $320 is just a lot of money that you could allocate elsewhere, and I feel like given the circumstances, this is definitely an area we could cut back in, even if that means beefing up your groceries a little bit. So maybe we'll compromise. I'm going to bring your dining out budget down to $75. I'd like to see it honestly at $50 or even $45 and say, one dining out a month. That's pretty drastic, so I'm going to leave it at $75, and I'm going to give you an extra $50 in groceries. Fuel, I don't really know your situation when it comes to gas, so I'm going to leave that. I'm assuming a lot of this is like going to and from work and things like that. So I'm going to leave that, and a lot of that is out of our control. Shopping miscellaneous, $100 isn't too egregious. Car insurance is pretty high. I would challenge you to shop around here. 2022 Highlander, this is a single vehicle. I think this does seem pretty high. You may be able to save a little bit per month. Also look into paying every 6 months instead of monthly. I don't know if this was just divided out per month or if you actually pay monthly, but if you do pay per month, I highly suggest looking into paying a lump sum amount every 6 months. I'm going to drop this down to $150 in hopes that you can reduce that just a little bit, even if it ends up just being a situation where you're paying every 6 months instead. Car maintenance being $80, I think that's reasonable. Kids' activities. This is a tough one. I know Lucas plays soccer and Emma is in dance, and I don't want to touch that. It's something that they really enjoy. But I think there are other expenses here that could absolutely be reduced a little bit. I'm also a mom of young kids, and we love different activities that don't always cost a lot of money. An example would be the library. We love going to the library. It's free. Not only do they have different like monthly activities, but the girls love looking at books, playing on the computers, things like that. We make it a special weekend activity. I'd also suggest looking into recurring memberships where you can like essentially buy it once and then use it throughout the year. One that we do is the zoo membership, and so we buy the Minnesota Zoo membership and we go like once a month, and it's a great way to cut back on spend. I'm going to challenge you to cut this down to $150. I imagine given the ages that soccer and dance aren't too expensive. I could be wrong. This is just a challenge to try to get you to cut back a little bit on kids' activities and just try to be creative on ways to save some money. Gifts, $50, that's very reasonable. Lifestyle, gym, health, and medical out of pocket. It's hard given that you lumped these types of categories together, these subcategories. I don't really know. I mean, medical, a lot of the times is out of our control. Health and gym, we could shave a little bit off, but I'm not sure really how this $400 breaks down. I am going to cut, considering that part of this might be, a gym membership. You could absolutely work out at home. Even if you were to look into something like the body program where you pay basically a monthly subscription, you could pay, an annual cost. I think it's like $150 for the whole year. I'm not sure what you're paying for the gym, but I would just challenge you, like, how can you be creative and kind of a pay once, benefit for the whole year type arrangement? This would apply to gym and health as well. I'm going to cut this down because, again, I don't know what your medical expenses are. I'm going to cut it down to $300, thinking a big portion of this might be things like the gym or maybe some not absolutely necessary expenses, at least for the first year. And we'll talk about that more shortly. But at a minimum, I really need to get this emergency fund in place. So for now, let's just cut lifestyle down just a little bit. Streaming subscriptions. Again, this is a situation where they bundled all their different subscriptions. I don't know how many are included here. I would challenge you to pick one and then maybe change every month if you wanted a variety, or if you have one that you really love, sticking with that. Like maybe it's Disney Plus. Just have Disney Plus, and let's say you want to switch over to like YouTube Premium or something the next month. Kind of jump around if that's something you would like. I also would suggest, asking like grandparents, maybe for Christmas or a birthday, they could gift Disney Plus for a year or something like that. Just start thinking like creatively about ways you could maybe cut back on some costs. I'll leave, I'm going to cut streaming down to $40 a month. Again, not really knowing what's all in there. I think there are ways to save. I would challenge you to cut even more, but just for the sake of not being too bare bones, I'll only go down to $40. Home maintenance, $285. This I feel like is pretty reasonable. I think my main concern with home maintenance is to get you outside of using the credit card. And so I'm not going to cut at all from this cost. I think it is expensive to own a home. And so I'm going to leave this number, but I think the real goal concerning home maintenance is just to not rely on your credit card when it comes to those expenses. Clothing, $50. I think that's reasonable. Entertainment at $400. I did find it really interesting how kids' expenses were so high, and then you also still had $400 on entertainment. I mean, honestly, again, I have little kids too, and we don't spend $400 combined, and that includes, expenses for kids and such. And so I would really challenge you during this time, even if it's just this sort of initial year where I'm going to push you really hard to get your savings in place and get kind of that financial security phase 1 done, to be as frugal as you can when it comes to spending on non-mandatory expenses. And entertainment is one of those areas where you could really cut back. So I'm going to challenge you to cut entertainment down to $150. I honestly think you could even go lower than that, but I don't want you missing out on, exciting events with friends and family. You still need to have some money to go out and make memories. So I don't want to be too bare bones here, but let's just see where we're at if we can cut you down to $150 for entertainment, and see if you can get creative and do some activities that maybe don't require a lot of money. The other area that I want to address with you, given your current situation, is your college savings. And this might sting a little bit because also as a mama, I understand the importance of wanting to help your kids with school. I have a lot of student loan debt myself, and so I get the desire to not want your kids to graduate with a ton of student loan debt and have that burden themselves. But given your circumstances, the fact that you have quite a bit of debt, you don't have an emergency fund yet, you're behind in retirement, we really should not be prioritizing college fund savings at this point. So I am going to zero out the college fund for now. Once we get your financial security in place, we pay off some debt, we can absolutely resume saving the college funds for your kiddos, and even at a higher rate. But right now, in my opinion, it should not be a priority. All right, now that we have made some cuts to the budget, we can scroll up to see what our new margin is. So initially we started off with $325 extra per month. We have increased that to $1,335. This is a much better number to work with and will allow us to make some serious progress each month. All right, given that we have now $1,335 to work with, let's take a look at our rescue plan to figure out what the next steps are for Jack and Sarah to get their finances in order. As I mentioned previously, the emergency fund is by far the biggest priority in my mind. In order to have 1 month worth of expenses, Jack and Sarah need $4,060. For 3 months worth of expenses, that means they need $12,180. As of now, they have a current emergency fund balance of $1,200. So with that in mind, they have a savings goal of $10,980 remaining in order to have 3 months of expenses saved. With $1,335 per month extra, if they allocated this directly to their emergency fund in full, it would be only a little over 8 months to get there. That means by the end of November, they could have a fully funded 3-month emergency fund ready to go before the holiday season even starts. That is goal number 1, and I challenge them to put every penny they can to that emergency fund and get there as quickly as possible. Before moving on to my next rescue plan line item, I'd like to talk about the importance of getting your emergency fund funded as quickly as possible. In Jack and Sarah's situation, not only do they have little kids, and so it's critical to make sure that your family has that security of having the emergency fund in place. The other factor that's really influencing essentially like the speed in which they fund this is the fact that they have a lot of debt. And while they're funding this emergency fund, they aren't putting anything other than minimum payments toward their debt. And so, for example, like with this credit card, they're paying almost 28% each month and not anything extra towards their credit card. So I highly encourage them to fund their emergency fund as quickly as possible. The next step on the rescue plan is setting up term life insurance. I want Jack and Sarah to look into this even while they are working on fully funding their emergency fund. This is essential for protecting your family. Should you no longer be able to work, or for whatever reason your family no longer has access to your income. The goal is to have 10 times the value of your income in a term life insurance policy. If you are healthy, the cost of these policies, it is not that high. It's actually quite reasonable. So I do encourage both Sarah and Jack to look into this. The first step is to check with your employer. You can get very well priced policies through your employer. At the same time, it's important to look outside your employer as well. My husband and I have policies both through our employers as well as outside. In the event that one of us were to develop some sort of illness and we're not able to work anymore, if we lose our job, we risk losing our coverage. And so we want to make sure that we have policies in place where we don't lose all of our insurance because we're no longer employed and then we become uninsurable. And so we like to have policies both through our employer because of the affordability aspect, but also outside of our employer as well. One other tip that I would like to add when it comes to life insurance is make sure you look into whether you are allowed to pay in full once a year. This is a great sinking fund if you set this up in terms of just sort of an annual payment fund, but you can save a lot of money by paying in full. All right, now that we have a fully funded emergency fund and we have term life insurance in place, I'd like Jack and Sarah to think about sinking funds. This is really important to ensure that Jack and Sarah no longer rely on credit cards for these known expenses that they essentially have all of their extra money at the end of the month allocated towards. Sinking funds basically allow them to set up mini savings accounts in which they can put money in each month so that when they have expenses that come up like school expenses or holidays, things like that, they have money already set aside for that. And they don't have to rely on their credit card in order to fund those expenses. In this case, let's first look at what we have left over in our margin so we know what we have to allocate. We have $1,333 that was left over in our budget. We are going to allocate $75 per month for the life insurance. That drops down our margin to $1,260 extra. I'm going to leave some discretion to Jack and Sarah in terms of what sinking funds they want to set up. Based off what they've told me, the majority of their credit card debt came from vacation spending, medical debt after having a baby, and home maintenance. They also mentioned that a lot of kids' expenses have led them to essentially spend kind of without a plan. With this in mind, those are the categories that if I was them, that's what I would set up my sinking funds for. But at the end of the day, I want them to sit down together and really think, what are the pain points in their budget that is essentially kind of stealing their money each month? Expenses that come up that they didn't have a plan for, maybe larger expenses that are causing them stress. If these are the categories that are the ones that are, the pain points for them, that's what I would suggest setting it up. But I want them to sit down and chat and determine, what categories make the most sense for them. For the sake of this video, I am going to allocate $460 to their sinking funds out of the $1,260 that we have left over. $460 a month will allow them to fund, I would say, 2 to 4 sinking funds, no more than that, to slowly start building some sort of cushion for these expected expenses that could come up. Up next, let's look into a couple more items before we get into the debt payoff journey. The last two items that I want Sarah and Jack to look into involve their pre-tax deductions from their paychecks. The first is to check to see whether they have disability insurance in place. I suggest that they obtain both long-term and short-term disability if they don't already have that. This again is part of that financial security piece should one of them become injured or sick and they're no longer able to work for a short time or a longer period due to illness. This protects their family's income and makes sure that they don't have a large gap that then results in them having to rely on their credit cards. I also want them to look in to see whether they have available to them a health savings account or a medical dental expense account. They have that large $400 allocation to medical, gym, and kind of that lifestyle account. I don't know how much of that went to medical versus those other categories. And so I just want to make sure that if they have this available to them, that they are using this pre-tax benefit. The last paycheck related research that I want them to look into is to know exactly what percentage of their gross income they're currently contributing to retirement. Now, I know some of you might disagree with this because they have debt, but right now they are behind in retirement savings. And so given the fact that they have debt, I don't suggest that they go all the way to 15%, but I do think that they should save up to at least 10% right now. Being in their 30s, compound interest is their best friend. And so if they aren't saving at least 10% in retirement, I do think that they should bump that up. I am not sure what their current savings rate is, and so I'm going to proceed in this video with the $800 snowball that we have excess or margin each month when it comes to the debt payoff plan. But if they do need to increase retirement, this might impact the snowball and require a little bit slower payoff journey for their debt. And you know what? That's okay. I don't want them missing out on retirement down the road because they were too aggressive when it comes to the debt payoff process. All right, let's go over a debt payoff plan when it comes to Sarah and Jack's credit card, auto loan, and the two student loans. First of all, before we get into it, there's two different approaches when it comes to debt payoff. There's what's called the snowball method, and then there's the avalanche method. The snowball pays the smallest loan first, and then once that loan is paid off, it then moves to the next smallest loan and essentially rolls whatever that minimum payment was for the initial loan into the next payment. And so the idea is your snowball or your payment slowly gets bigger and bigger as you pay off debt. The other is called the avalanche. It starts with the highest interest loan first and then moves to the next highest interest and basically knocks off the loans based off of whichever loan you're paying the most interest on at the time. Ideally, I prefer the avalanche because typically you save the most money with the avalanche method. But as you'll see with this spreadsheet, we'll see exactly what the different savings are through this little drop down. And so we'll do a comparison as we walk through the numbers. And so here I have a balance date of 12/1/26. I'm using 12/1 because that's the date that I'm anticipating Jack and Sarah will be done with their emergency fund. So then we can get a real rough estimate of when these different debts can be paid off based off of our snowball or debt payoff approach. And so here we've got the four different debts. We have the credit card with a $6,200 balance. We have the interest rate of 27.9% and the minimum payment of $150. We have the auto loan, $27,500, 5.2%, and a payment of $510. Jack's student loan at $38,000, 6% interest, and $420 per month minimum payment. And then Sarah's loan, $26,000 balance, 5.5% interest, and then $280 minimum payment. I do acknowledge that because this is a moment in time and they will be continuing to make payments on these won't be the exact numbers, but it will give us a rough estimate. So coming down to the bottom of the screen, we have our monthly payment. This includes both our minimum payment, which is $1,360, as well as our extra margin that we have. In this case, it's $800. And so we refer to that as our snowball amount. And so here, looking at the avalanche method, we have a total interest paid of $12,800. And it tells us that we will be debt-free by April 2031. If we scroll back up, we could take a look at the snowball method to see if that approach and priority would make more sense. You can switch this over to snowball, scroll back down. And then see here, it's a $13,141 with April 2031. And so we would be paying more interest if we were to use the snowball method over the avalanche. In this case, I do suggest that they use the avalanche instead of the snowball because of the added interest. One of the fun things about these calculators is you can really essentially play around with these numbers. The good news here is between the two options, the snowball and the avalanche, the payoff date is going to be the same, April 2031. It's really just a matter of how much interest we're paying. So the decision is easy. Where I like to have fun here is to go up to the top at the monthly payment and play around with it. Like what happens if we are able to save maybe an extra $300 a month? So let's say our payment is actually $2,460 a month. So if we have an extra $400 a month, that drops our debt-free date down to September 2030. So it goes from April 2031 to September 2030. So that's like what, almost 6 months, 7 months difference. And so it's really fun to play around and see, if I can just put a little bit more per month to my debt, how can that, change the payoff schedule? And then going back to Avalanche, you have the ideal interest payoff plan and process along with the payoff date, again, which didn't change here. So in this case, we'll go back to the original amount. Which was $2,160. So really what this plan is telling us is based off the numbers that we ran together, the order of precedent will be credit card debt first. That's the highest interest. And they'll have that paid off as soon as August of 27. Then the next debt will be essentially that minimum payment is going to be rolled in to the next chunk where Jack's student loan will be focused on, where the goal is to have that paid off if this plan is followed by December 2029. And then Sarah's student loan would be next, and then lastly we would have the Highlander with April 2031. And again, this is if they have an extra $800 to put towards this debt. So really this isn't a crazy payoff schedule. At this point, they would have, let's see, so 2026, we'll say January 1st, 2027. I mean, we've got 4.5 years, and they could be completely debt-free. This is life-changing if they, stick to their guns and really prioritize this debt payoff schedule. At the same time, they have a fully funded emergency fund. They are contributing to retirement. They have $460 going to sinking funds. And, while their budget definitely got a serious trim, they're put in a position where they're, just having to be a little more creative. And so, I think this is definitely a doable process. They can play around with this number. Maybe they don't have the full 800 and they want to drop it down to 700. At the end of the day, it's up to them how aggressive they want to be. But that's the beauty of it, is it's all about having a plan and then seeing what that hard work will result in. And so I love seeing these dates because it just makes it seem real. And I think that's the beauty about having a rescue plan, is not only do you actually see real numbers, but you know that you've addressed all the different areas of your financial plan to make sure everything is covered. With a few intentional changes, the Martin family could go from feeling overwhelmed and stuck in debt to finally building some breathing room and some much needed financial security. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you the most in this budget? Or what changes would you make if this were your family's finances? If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe for more budget rescue episodes. And remember, with the right plan, any budget can be rescued. Until next time, bye guys.